Hello everyone, thanks for joining me on this week's 172nd Air Wing video. The channel is now up to 409 subscribers, so I would like to take a moment and extend my thanks to the supporters of my channel. I did not imagine that so many people would be interested in the content that I'm producing of my personal collection, but I am happy for it. And I will return that support by continuing to make more videos. I will point out that because I am reviewing my own models, there's going to be a point in the distant future where I will just run out of stuff to make videos with, because I can't just keep buying new models indefinitely. At some point, the limitations of finances and physical storage room for all these dang boxes have to take into account. So yeah, at some point in the far future, I'm gonna have to publish what might be called my last video, but we're still a ways out on that. So until that day, I would like to offer the option for anyone who's interested in my channel to check out my other videos. And if you like what you see, consider subscribing. That way you'll be notified when I upload a new video each week, which I am sticking to on a Sunday morning schedule. So for those of you that have subscribed and shown your support, I extend my deepest thanks. To those who have not, consider subscribing. So with that, we will get into the fun stuff, which is talking about the HobbyMaster F-35C. So now with this F-35 in the collection, I have all three Joint Strike Fighter variants. So I did a review on the US Air Force F-35A a couple of years back. And I reviewed the F-35B in US Marine Corps colors last week, so now we have the US Navy version. And this one is in NAWDC colors, or I should actually say Nautic colors. It's also pronounced NAWDC if you don't care about pissing off the Navy folks, but I'm gonna be a little bit nicer than some folks on YouTube and call it the way the Navy wants to, which is Nautic. So NAWDC, the initials there, or acronym I should say, stands for Naval Air Warfare Development Center. And NAWDC is a center of excellence for 4 divisions. They are Havoc, which specializes in electronic warfare, flying the E-818G Growler. Strike U, which specializes in, of course, strike and air-to-ground missions. Top Dome, which is a mission orientation to airborne early warning and airborne control, so think along the lines of an E2 AWACS type mission. And you have finally Top Gun, which is the acronym which really needs no explanation. So in the 1990s, as part of Cold War realignment, these disparate schools were unified at Fallon, Nevada. So those of you that have watched Top Gun Maverick and saw the title crawl that said San Diego was Fightertown, USA, be advised that that is just Hollywood Liberty, because I'm sure Tom Cruise probably took one look at Fallon and realized there's no way in hell he's going to film a multi-million-dollar video / movie there. So they just basically pretended the Top Gun was located at San Diego the entire time and filmed the whole thing out of Naval Air Station, North Island. So definitely a prettier place to do a video than, say, Fallon, but that is not the accurate location of where Top Gun is and has been since the mid-1990s. So why is the F-35 coming to Top Gun and Fallon at this point? And the reason is the Navy's doing something different here. Usually, Top Gun would get the last of a given line of aircraft. They were almost never the command that got the first ones. And based on Brad Elward's summary compendium on Top Gun's history, for most of the command's history, they've never gotten frontline fighters when they first came out. When the F-14 first came out, they were sticking with F-5s and T-38s and A-4s. They didn't get F-14s assigned to the Top Gun unit until almost 10 years after the airplane first flew. And it's been that way with the Legacy Hornet. It was some years when the Hornet was in combat. It actually went to Desert Storm before Top Gun actually got their own examples. And the same situation happened with the Super Hornet. And in each instance, there were some unpleasant consequences from that. Whenever Top Gun found themselves last in line to get the Navy's newest tactical aircraft, it put them on the back foot in terms of being able to generate information for their mission, which is educating naval aviators as well as promoting tactics for the fleet. Two things which are hard to do if you don't have the equipment to actually do those things. And initially, whenever the Legacy Hornets, the F-14s way back in the 80s, and the Super Hornet in the early to mid 2000s, when those aircraft first hit the fleet, Top Gun was forced to borrow their students' airplanes to get an understanding of the capabilities so they could teach to it and develop tactics, which is obviously not a very optimized way of going about things. So due to that and the complications of seeing fleet squadrons going to war with airplanes that Top Gun had no exposure to, and it led to some issues with the schoolhouse and the tactics community being able to do their jobs. Again, it's hard to recommend tactics for an airplane you've never flown, and to have a situation where Top Gun would be teaching students who had flight hours and combat time in the Super Hornet, especially during the earlier phases of the Afghanistan War as well as the Iraq War in 2003. Many of those combat veterans would go to the schoolhouse to get their Top Gun tour and their strike fighter instructor credentials, and they'd know more about the airplane than the people that are teaching the course, which, it's not an ideal situation, right? So in a spirit of learning from past mistakes, when the F-35 came online, the NAWDC community, the Nautic community, I should say, tried to get ahead of that situation by getting the F-35C into the community as quickly as possible. So that led to the assignment of the bureau number displayed here, which was originally assigned to VF-101 and was transferred to Nautic in 2014. So after the transfer of, actually, excuse me, I have my notes mixed up. The aircraft was originally built in 2014. It was assigned to Nautic in 2020 under Top Gun. And at that point, the Nautic community was able to take the aircraft, the F-35, and build tactics and guidance and a course syllabus to teach the students of the F-35C, which is now, of course, becoming more and more prolific in the fleet. So it's the first of what will probably be many F-35s to join the Nautic team and Nautic equipment list, and I imagine it will be around for quite some time. So it'll be interesting to see what tactics they come up with. I imagine it'll probably be another 50 years before any of us normal people will read about it, but it's nice to see that occasionally Big Navy does learn from the past. It may not be common, but it does seem to happen. So on that note, I think it's worth also stopping by the subject of Top Gun and why the F-35C wasn't necessarily featured in that. Besides the opening scene, of course, there's a line in that movie where Maverick says that GPS jamming negates the F-35, which of course is not true at all. It's actually just not really a factual statement at all, but they had to explain why the F-35 wasn't used, and the reason it wasn't used had nothing to do with the airplane's capabilities, but more along the lines of the fact that if you brought the F-35 into the movie, the script as written probably falls apart because, obviously SAMs are not a concern, and there's not much of a film showing 5 aviators pressing a couple of buttons on a touchscreen and launching JDAMs and knocking out the site with pre-programmed coordinates. I mean, it's not really blockbuster material, right? There's not much challenge for the characters doing that, and there's probably about 5,000 or 6,000 ways that mission could have been done in that movie better than the way they showed it, but it's a movie, right? You're not supposed to go there to get factual intel about how to prosecute a tactical strike mission. You're eating popcorn and enjoying the show, right? So in that vein, they had to, of course, explain why the F-35 wasn't used, and part of it was the fact that if they did, it would obviously negate any sort of drama. And it would also be logistically impossible to film because in order to put the actors literally in the airplanes and then film it real time with actual footage of the actors in the aircraft flying, they would need 2-seat aircraft to do this, and there are no 2-seat F-35 variants. At this point, there's been some discussion with Israel on them potentially making a 2-seat F-35, which would be kind of interesting. But right now, and especially in 2019, there are no F-35 2-seaters, which of course disqualifies any possibility of that. And then to add to that, the F-35C was only initially capable, reached initial operating capability in 2019, which is when they were filming the film, or shooting the film. So as a result of that, between those two factors and the fact that the Navy is not in the habit of broadcasting the latest of their technology, those all factors all meant that the Super Hornet had to be the primary aircraft used, which is just kind of a little bit of history repeating, because that's basically what happened in the 1980s. At that time, the F-14 was the legacy aircraft, and the F/A-18 Hornet was the newest hotness in the naval fleet. And while the Hornet was available and in service, the Navy was not going to allow Paramount to film a movie about their latest aircraft, especially with the Cold War still going on. So the F-14 was a bit older, and it had a two-seat cabin, which made it easier to get a one-on-one dialogue between Maverick and Goose, and the rest, as they say, is history. So we'll have to wait a little bit longer before we see the F-35 on the big screen in significant quantities for the U.S. Navy. So, but I will have to say they did do a good job shooting the F-35s on the carrier deck during their initial cruise in 2019. So big ups to Joseph Kosinski and Tom Cruise and the production staff of that movie for at least doing the so-called Fat Amy, as the pejorative nickname of the F-35 is, some credit in that production. So with that, we'll pivot right to the subject of the model itself and what comes with it. So much like the F-35B and the F-35A, you do get a lot in this kit. And it really is a kit, because there's a lot of small parts to track and to install here. You get external weapons, so each wing has 3 hard points that can accommodate various air-to-ground weapons. You have the internal bomb bays, which will carry either AIM-120s or various varieties of joint direct attack munitions. The landing gear also has its doors that you can take off and put on to demonstrate in flight or pose the model on the ground. And relative to the F-35B, there's not as much stuff here, but you do have quite a bit of kit to keep track of, and it's also worth paying attention to that on the F-35C, or at least maybe this release. I'm not sure if HobbyMaster may be doing this in general, but I noticed the AIM-9X pylons are glued to the wing on this one. So you cannot remove them as it comes out of the box. I'm sure some careful work with a X-Acto knife in there will probably take it out, but I just didn't want to mess with that, especially before rolling footage for this review. But I thought that was interesting, because the other F-35s, they do come with AIM-9X pylons, and they are detachable. So I'm curious why on this release HobbyMaster decided to glue those permanently on the wing. But I'm not bothered by that. Just be aware of it if you want to display your F-35 with the wings completely clean and the full stealth configuration. You won't be able to do that out of the box with this one. And again, I'm curious why that is, because you can do that with the other 2 variants that HobbyMaster produces. So overall, I think it's a good model, and I have to state up front that I generally don't purchase models with my own money that I think are gonna suck. So it's hard for me to really impartially review these, because it's my own collection. So if I didn't have some degree of affection or attachment to presenting it, I wouldn't have bought it with my own money, which means I'm not going to really throw a model on my channel and say it sucks unless I've made a really bad miscalculation. And I try to avoid doing those. So as a result, you're not going to see too many of my videos where I'm like, oh yeah, this particular release is terrible, and avoid it, and et cetera, because, well, it's, if I don't like it, or I think it's suspect, or I don't want to get it, I'm just not going to buy it. And if I don't buy it, I'm not going to have a review of it. So because of that dynamic, if you're watching a review on it, I'm probably going to think somewhat positively of the experience, and I'm glad to say that there's not too many issues with this one. So overall, the proportions of the cockpit to the control surfaces are good. So I do like the fact that it's not misshapen. You don't see strange cockpit textures or weird features or miscanted tails or any of that kind of error or misalignments going on with this model. It's all fairly, from what I can tell, accurate to the real thing in terms of proportion and where things are. You get a comprehensive set of weapons in it, so you can display this in basically any configuration an F-35 can do. The overall small parts fit most of them. There are some exceptions, but for the most part, the small parts do fit, and they don't need much in the way of sanding, filing, or blue tack to attach or remove to the model. And the good thing about it is it's HobbyMaster. So they produce quite a few models in their releases, which means if you're a fan of the F-35, you can probably get one, and it's not going to be an arm and a leg in terms of expense. So pros to state there. For the cons, for this particular release, I've already mentioned the AIM-9X pylons are fixed. They're glued to the airplane. That might be a con for what you intend to pursue with your display preferences, but for me it's not a big deal, but it is something to note. There is, of course, the excessive surface relief of the surface details, such as the DAS distributed aperture system camera window right here, as well as some of the various surfaces and applications. And then they have the refueling probe here, which is again an exaggerated sense of relief. Now, to be fair, on the real airplane there are raised features. However, they're not represented to this extent on the F-35 in reality. So I've said this on my other two F-35 reviews. I'll say it here. I would love to see HobbyMaster turn that down in the next release, or maybe a second generation release down the line, just to reduce some of that surface detail to make it look a little closer to the actual in-service aircraft. Now that, of course, we know more about what these look like than when HobbyMaster first released these years ago. So the nose landing gear cover right here, I had to put some blue tack to keep it attached because the insert is oriented to the back. So when the front is in this position, it generally likes to just hang down with a gap. So I did put some blue tack there to keep it attached. I also used some blue tack on the forward main landing gear doors, the one here, as well as the one on the left. And I'm just going to do a quick discussion on that because it was a flaw that I pointed out in my F-35B video, as well as the F-35A. So on those two releases, these parts are in two separate sets. You have a set that shows the landing gear door down, and you have a set that shows the landing gear door up, as you see here. That's not technically accurate because the only landing gear door that is down is going to be this one. So when the landing gear is down, this door comes down, the landing gear comes down, and it's fixed. This door only opens up so that the wheel can come out and swing backward. Once the main landing gear door has come down and this main landing gear leg has come out of the housing, and then the wheel is down and locked, the landing gear door then comes back into the fuselage, and then you just have this door facing down and the landing gear extended. So because of that dynamic, displaying the F-35 with the forward landing gear door like here, down in the down position is a bit incorrect. And I'm glad to see that HobbyMaster seems to have realized it and addressed it with the F-35C here, because you only get one set of doors here, and these doors are to be kept inside the fuselage, no matter how you display it. So if you have the landing gear down, the main landing gear door here is going to be in the up position, as it should. So bravo to HobbyMaster for that. And unfortunately, the reason this subject is in the con section of the video is because the implementation of it is a little bit rushed, which is understandable because they're fixing something that wasn't caught until after the mold was put in production. But you'll want to put some blue tack on the fitting that this goes into, because it sits fairly loose, and out of the box it's not going to stay attached to the model. It's just going to fall right off. So just bear in mind that that might be a concern. Potentially it might not be. I don't know how the tolerances are because I don't buy series of the same model in my collection. So I only just have the one. So maybe the one you get at your retailer is going to have better tolerances than the one that I have. But just bear that in mind. These doors are going to be in the up position when you are displaying the model on the ground or in the air. And then finally, we have the pilot. Now, the HobbyMaster pilot figures have always been a point of criticism on the forums, and I get it because they're relatively generic, especially when you compare the pilot figures in HobbyMaster's kits to what you find from Caliber, for example. Caliber's pilots are really well done, whereas HobbyMaster's, well, fairly generic. So in this case, the generic part is really obvious because the F-35, as many of you know, uses a customized projection display helmet, which costs $400,000 and has to be custom fitted to the individual pilot. I'm going to discuss that in more detail once I get to my three-way comparison video showcasing the F-35A, B, and C together. But that helmet is going to look very distinctive because of how it projects the distributed aperture system camera and infrared system into the pilot's eyes directly. And that whole system is going to make a helmet that is very different in appearance than what you would see on like a normal quote-unquote brain bucket for something like an F-16, right? So when you look at an F-35's helmet, it just looks very different than the helmets that you would see on like a normal aircraft, and that's not modeled here. So that's something I would like to see HobbyMaster do, is maybe come out with a pilot figure that has the enhanced display helmet of the F-35 included, especially when you look at the fact that that's one of the major technological advancements of the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter and its capabilities. So those are pretty much the cons of it. I think this particular one I had to get because once you get the F-35A and the F-35B, it really doesn't make sense to avoid getting the C. And on top of that, the NAWDC colors were kind of something that I do like. I noticed also that they included the Top Gun tail flash here, so I'm glad to see that they've included it there. So that to me probably signifies that it's going to spend most of its time with the Top Gun folks instead of the Strike U side of the house. But all the assets are shared by NAWDC collectively, so they can be used for any of the missions that NAWDC has, and in support of course, the student coursework that the NAWDC Center is known to complete. So with that, I will wrap the video here. Stay tuned for my upcoming three-way comparison of the Joint Strike Fighter, the F-35A, the B, and the C. Put them all together, throw some information out there about the models, how they compare, if you're on a budget, which one you should pick, and some of the aspects that set them apart versus some of the things that make them joint, right? So thank you again for watching, and consider watching my other videos in the channel if you like what you've seen today, and I will catch you in the next video.